Hey, Scott Horton here to tell you about this great new book by Michael Swanson, The War State. In The War State, Swanson examines how Presidents Truman, Eisenhower, and Kennedy both expanded and fought to limit the rise of the new national security state after World War II. If this nation is ever to live up to its creed of liberty and prosperity for everyone, we are going to have to abolish the empire. Know your enemy. Get The War State by Michael Swanson. It's available at your local bookstore or at Amazon.com in Kindle or in paperback. Just click the book in the right margin at scotthorton.org or thewarstate.com. Our first guest on the show today is Michael Scheuer. He's the former chief of the CIA's bin Laden unit, and he wrote the books Through Our Enemy's Eyes, Imperial Hubris, Why the West is Losing the War on Terrorism, Marching Toward Hell, America and Islam After Iraq, and I guess he meant the last Iraq War, and then the biography of Osama bin Laden. Welcome back to the show. How are you doing?
Good, Scott. How are you?
I'm doing real good. Appreciate you joining us on the show today. And I'm very interested in what all you have to say about what's been going on in Iraq since June. The last time we spoke was, I believe, in April, and I was predicting that America would be reinvading Iraq in order to fight the rise of the new caliphate between Syria and Iraq. And then it seems like that's exactly what's going on. But I haven't heard from you since then. So, except I saw you speaking with Lou Dobbs on Fox News, and we'll get to that in a minute because there are some interesting things to talk about there. But I'm not sure where to start. I think you probably got a better idea of where to begin with what you have to say about America's new Iraq policy, the new Iraq War.
Well, Scott, it's a continuation of the crap we've been doing for the past 15 years, or almost 20 years now, since bin Laden declared war. When you listen to these people, whether it's Boehner or the president or the Secretary of Defense or Dempsey, the Joint Chiefs Chairman, it's the same old song over and over again. This has nothing to do with Islam. There's a limited number of these people. We can beat them with air support and one at a time. And if you step back and look at the map of the world, they're on 4 different continents now and in control in a number of places. We have let this become, from a minor cavity, it has now become a root canal. And the president clearly, and the Republicans clearly don't have an idea of what they've done in terms of causing this war or motivating this war by continuing to intervene everywhere in the Middle East, continuing to support Saudi Arabia and the other tyrannies of Arabs and supporting the Israelis. This is now this is a world war, Scott. And you can say we're not waging a war against Islam till you're blue in the face. And what the truth is that every day a greater part of Islam is waging war against us. And so ultimately we lose if we don't wise up a little. Mm-hmm. But I think the odds against us wising up are very, very long.
Mm-hmm. All right. Well, so, I mean, there's a lot to discuss there, but just, basically on the starting point there of the motive of those who fight us, to people who aren't all that familiar with this debate as it's taken place this whole time, maybe the last they heard, they hate us because we're free and because they're Islamic. And it's such a bad religion, Mike, that it tells people that they have to fight and kill and attack everyone who's not like them. And so it sounds halfway like that's what you're saying, that this is about Islam and Islam's at war with us. And, what would Frank Gaffney say? Something along those lines. On the other hand, you turn right around and you say intervention over there, support for Israel over there, et cetera, et cetera. So I know I'm being overly simplistic, but which is it? How is it both? What do you say?
Why can't it be both, Scott? Islam is a religion just as Judaism is, or Sikhism, or Christianity when it was worth a damn. If your religion is attacked, you defend it. And the people who are attacking us for 2 reasons. Because we have supported for 60 years tyranny across the Muslim world. And that's the number one thing they're revolting against, and Israel. Tyranny in Israel. They regard tyranny they regard Israel as a tyranny also. When they're responding to their faith, they're indeed being good Muslims. One of the great lies that has been told about people like Osama bin Laden is that they're bad Muslims. If you look at Islam, they're very good Muslims. They've taken upon themselves to defend their brethren because the kings, the generals, and the other tyrants in the Middle East wouldn't. The second reason, beyond our support for those people, is our deliberate policy of intervening in other people's wars. Libya is the most recent example. We've turned that into a hive of Islamists, which are going to be a problem for us into the future. We supported a free election in Egypt, then overthrew it and supported the military coup that took power. Our presence is what motivates these people. Do they hate the kind of freedom we have, the kind of liberty we have, gender equality, elections? Of course they hate it, but they're not going to fight against it. Who would blow themselves up because women go to the university? They blow themselves up because they want us out of their world. And what we've done is treat them as madmen, few in number, and with a gentle hand in terms of killing them. And unfortunately, none of it has worked. We're still at the starting line. And until we realize that this is preeminently a religious war, a war of a religion defending itself, we can neither understand the depth and the breadth of the motivation among young Muslim men, nor will we understand that there's a way to cut it short and redirect it by stopping this unholy intervention policy we have in the Middle East.
Now, so what about Syria? You mentioned Libya there, but then it seemed like what was such a big deal about Libya, other than the absolute chaos now, was supporting the Mujahideen, many of them veterans of the Iraq War, against Gaddafi, where they had fought Americans, against Gaddafi back in 2011. It turned the place upside down, and yeah, it spread into Mali and this and that, but nobody in America anyway really cares that much about what happens in Mali. But the other part of it was that the Mujahideen and a hell of a lot of the weapons, including, Gaddafi's old weapon stores, went for the next phase of the project, which was Syria. And so when we're not supporting the secular military dictator types, we're supporting revolutions against them. And I can't shake the idea, Michael, that this is like trying to de-Ba'athify Saddam Hussein's government, or, overthrow Saddam and de-Ba'athify the government and abolish the army. But if Zarqawi's war had already been going on for a year and a half or 2 years or 3 years at that time, how in the world people look back on de-Ba'athifying the army, de-Ba'athifying the Iraqi state and the army and kicking all the Sunnis out of everything as helping lead to that massive insurgency. But can you imagine doing so in the middle of the insurgency? And then that's been our policy since 2011. Even to this day, even after ISIS has grown up so strong, it's declared itself a real state.
And it has the monetary power and the bureaucratic power to control the area it's in. It is, in essence, it's a de facto state. People are working for it. People are prospering under it. People's wages are better than they were under either Maliki or Assad. It is a force to be reckoned with, but we don't understand that. We're completely inane. What difference does it make, Scott? If you're looking back into February 2011, what difference does it make who rules in Egypt or in Libya or anywhere else? If the people want to change their government and they don't get all killed and they succeed, good for them. We need to go back to Washington and Jefferson, who said, anybody who controls a country, we recognize and we deal with. Their internal problems are their own, but we do not try to overthrow them because we dislike their politics.
Yeah. All right, now, so what about the Islamic State? Because here, and I'm actually very curious about what you think about all the difference between them wanting to go ahead and declare a caliphate now in defiance of Zawahiri and splitting off from Al-Qaeda, and what you think of that strategy and what's going to become of it.
Well, I think what we're seeing is a change in generation. After the National Interest asked me to write a piece about a year and a half ago about what's going to happen after Zawahiri. And what we're seeing is a new generation coming into the leadership roles in all of these organizations. And I have to say, Scott, that we can point to differences between Zawahiri and Islamic State and al-Nusra Front, and all of that is true. But when you look at the bunch of them together, they're all going in the same direction. They may not be united, but they're all going in the same direction. They're trying to get rid of our allies, the Israelis, and they're trying to drive us out of the region. So there's really not, we shouldn't count on that factionalism to be of any benefit to us at all, really. But the point you were making is, I forgot what the question was. I'm sorry.
It was very overly broad, really. It was just, what do you think of this,
what I was saying is we're seeing a new generation, Scott. Mm-hmm. This guy, Baghdadi, for example, it has what Osama bin Laden sorely lacked, which is a credential. He's a PhD in Islamic studies. More and more of the people we're seeing taking either political leadership or command leadership in the field are better educated than the first generation of al-Qaeda. We're seeing people who are more familiar with their religion and who have a much more vicious, if you will, or at least a much more militant view of how they need to go about defending it. And we're also seeing a generation that is extraordinarily savvy in terms of the tools of modernity, whether it's internet, videos, rifles, mortars, whatever it is. And so what we're seeing is a generation taking the place of the old one that is much more savvy in all the areas that are going to cause us problems.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, well, now, a few different points here. First of all, as far as all these groups being basically the same, that's what Patrick Coburn says from walking around in Syria and talking to them. And, of course, we're seeing more and more of how all the different jihadi groups in Syria all get along and have ceasefires with each other and give each other American TOW missiles and
what they really argue about is timing, Scott. As you pointed out, Zawahiri said now's not the time. Baghdadi and his boys said, yes, it is the time. And I think part of it, we have to keep in mind that Zawahiri wanted to declare the start of the caliphate in Afghanistan after we leave. Mm. And so there's a little bit of rivalry there.
Right.
But
personal rivalry, yeah.
Yeah, the one thing about an insurgency, one of the reasons it almost always wins is because they're factionalized. They fight each other, they disagree with each other, but there's no head to cut off. And we've certainly proved that with al-Qaeda. We've spent 15 years trying to cut off the head and have not yet realized it's not there.
Right. Yeah, they found bin Laden's caliphate. He was hiding in the attic even from his wife. Which is a pretty funny end for him, if you ask me. But so now, what I wonder, though, is if America does, and I think they're going to end up sending in the Marines because there's no other force that can dislodge these guys from Mosul to Crete, Fallujah. And so I think just under the assumptions of the empire, eventually they'll end up with another full-scale ground invasion and all that. But I wonder then if America ends up with any degree of victory over ISIS in that sense, whether that just gives a massive PR win and maybe more than just PR win to al-Qaeda, which proves their case that you can't win on the near front until you get rid of the far enemy first. It's just going to redouble everybody's efforts to attack inside the United States.
That's, Scott, this is what we've seen in these three guys' heads getting cut off is not just barbarity or meanness. What we saw was the Islamic State putting a worm on a hook. The one thing they need more than anything is U.S. intervention on the ground in Iraq. And if it brings along ground troops from Sunni states fighting on the side of the Americans and the Shia, the more the better. And there's no one who has more respect in the United States for the Marine Corps than I have. But if they take those places back, the question becomes, then what? They will take them back because the Mujahideen will, as they always do, run away to fight again later.
Right.
Are we going to garrison that damn place for when? Like the Balkans for 20 years? And knowing that if we ever leave, the war starts again? It is a nonsense. Obama is a madman. Really, he deserves a nice little white jacket that ties in the back because he doesn't have a clue about what to do.
Yeah, in other words, what you're saying is he's doing nothing but provoke these guys, doing nothing to limit them. But so tell me then, if I could magically make you the national security advisor and you could put that straitjacket on him and force him to listen to you, what's the plan?
I I think the first plan is to say to him, and for him to say that to the American people, we don't like the fact that our two guys got their heads cut off, but this is a zero threat to U.S. national security. The people who did it are, and their allies are, but first we have to have a discussion. Someone's got to tell the truth, Scott. These are not madmen. If we were fighting madmen, it would be a pleasure because they make mistakes, they can't organize. All of those things would play against them. But these are calculating, in many cases, well-educated individuals and street savvy in terms of how the world is. Obama and Clinton and Bush, the only world they could see was the world they wanted to be. And so they always lost because what they want is never coming and it's not out there at the moment. So my idea would be to for God's sake, do the pipeline, get rid of our dependence on anybody else for oil, and dump the Saudis. And if our allies don't want to do that, fine. Let them stand by the Saudis and let them take the brunt. Better to kill Frenchmen than Americans. Israel, what in the world are we doing there? Our foreign policy of intervention has not only alienated the Muslim world, but it has absolutely destroyed Israel's security. I have no regard for the claim that Israel has a right to survive. No country has a right to survive, but it deserves to be able to defend itself to the extent it believes is necessary. And what we have done by taking out Saddam, by turning against Assad, by destroying Gaddafi, was to make sure that the Israelis now have the enemy, the Mujahideen, right on their borders everywhere, except Jordan, and Jordan is going to go if we intervene in the north. So I don't know, what do? You stop motivating people to attack us and let them attack the people they would prefer to attack, the Israelis, the Saudis, the Shia. Let the war fester there. There's no real other choice. Our military is broken. They say the Army is 450,000. 1 in 3 of those are shooters. They couldn't hold Virginia against the people who have rifles in Virginia. So, these people talk a good, and on top of that all, we're bankrupt, you have to remember. So I don't know what these people are talking about or why they're talking about it, but I know not one of them has bothered to tell the American people the truth.
Well, on a great many of those things, and I wonder whether you think that, they're saying in the media that there's a discrepancy between Obama and the generals about whether they're going to send ground troops or not. It seems clear enough to me, like I was explaining just by thinking it out, that under their assumptions of what must be done here, eventually they will be sent in the Army of the Marines, probably sooner than later. But I wonder if you think Obama is being dishonest, or if he really thinks he can do, a kind of Northwestern Tribal Territories style drone war against, as you said, a state, a new kind of proto-state.
He may well think that, Scott, because he was educated in the Ivy League, and he clearly doesn't understand the power of religion in today's world. He's like Christopher Hitchens in that regard. Hitchens was a very brilliant man, but he was stupid in terms of world affairs because he could not get his arms around the idea that religion plays an extraordinarily strong role in every place but England and the United States for the most part, and most of Western Europe. And I think Obama's the same way. He said something about after the first American was decapitated, he said, well, the world in the 21st century will not put up with this. And it's like somehow human nature has changed because he's in the world and he's ruling us. Mm-hmm. Human nature is always the same. People are going to kill each other in the most barbarous methods that they find are useful.
Right. Yeah, even Francis Fukuyama in The End of History, where he says, more or less free markets and more or less democracy are the final form of human sovereignty, et cetera, et cetera. He still said, so that basically excludes fascism and communism from ever being able to work, and no one's going to ever believe in them again, as really being able to work. But he did not at all discount the power of ethnic and tribal and religious identity and nationalism and every other kind of other, right-wing flavor. He just said that no matter how right-wing you are, you're still going to have to let people, let there be prices on the market, basically,
Well, you go back to Sam Huntington's book, and the older that book gets, the more correct it is. There is a clash of civilizations, but what he didn't expect was it would be waged by the American and British and European administrations against the Muslim world. They're not trying to install Sharia here. They're not trying to keep our women from going to university. We're trying to destroy their faith. We're trying to impose secularism on them, or worse, heresy in the Shias of Iraq. And this is not a complicated problem, Scott. It is an easy problem to understand if you're willing to kind of abandon the lousy education you had. Not you, but I mean generally our leadership.
Hey, me
and
too.
Accept the world as it is.
Yeah, no, you're right. I definitely think you're right. And it's funny because I'm a libertarian and a pretty evangelical one at that, and I sure believe that individual human rights to me, are the top of my priorities and for all people in the world. And I would like very much to kind of sell the ideas of libertarianism on the market to the world, like Harry Brown and his great Statue of Liberty speech. If he had been the president, 9/11 wouldn't have happened because he would have ended all the interventionism, and then he would have just given speeches beating people over the head about liberty all the time and how wonderful it is. And if you want to change the world and make the world a more Declaration of Independence kind of a place, that's the way you do it. You do it how Ron Paul would do it. He'd explain it to you and recommend, which Hayek should you read first and that kind of thing. And instead, we got George W. Bush and the rest of them since just going, yeah, I'll show you freedom. It's a daisy cutter in your neighborhood.
Yeah. Well, Ron Paul, of course, is an echo and an eloquent one of Washington, of John Adams, of Alexander Hamilton. Absolutely the case that we were going to be the best we could be at home, and if that serves as an educational tool for the rest of the world and something they want to follow, fine. If not, also fine. Look at Europe hasn't been closer to war in 60 years than it is now. Why? Because we and the Europeans intervened to overthrow that government in Kiev.
Right.
If you can't see the problem with intervention, you're bordering on a fascist. And I think Obama's administration has strong fascist influences in it.
Yeah, sure, they all do. I mean, and also, I want to argue with you every time, but then I think, no, you're right. I mean, hell, your job was telling these people what the truth is and looking at the glaze in their eyes when you told them. That's your job at the CIA. These people, as you keep explaining it, they just don't understand. Hillary Clinton can sit here and be mad at Obama publicly for not backing the rebels in Syria enough. John McCain was saying to Chuck Hagel on TV yesterday or the day before yesterday, well, what if Assad attacks the rebels? You're still not going to protect them from him? And it's like, dude, are you kidding me? These people, they really don't understand, do they? That
they don't.
You really are on all sides of a sectarian civil war here, Mr. McCain, and you're doing the wrong thing here, pal.
I used to think that there was only two choices, Scott. They either didn't understand it or they understood it and they're lying because they don't want to upset the apple cart of multiculturalism, the apple cart of open borders, the apple cart of all civilizations and people are the same. Because they're going to have to, at some point, if America is to survive, if America is not to fight a war in North America against these people, someone's going to have to stand up and say, listen, what we're facing is a religious war against 1.3 or 4 billion people. Chop out the Shia and you have 1.2 billion Sunnis. What do you want to do? You want to keep pursuing the policies that make them attack you? Or would you like to live here comfortably in North America as we have for a long time? And if they want to be libertarians or Democrats or whatever they want to be, let them be it. But we're not going to help them be it. Mm-hmm. But I can't see that happening with with Mr. Paul or Dr. Paul out of the picture and his son really not seeming to know where he stands on most every issue. I don't know where it's going to come from.
Yeah. And by the way, I'm glad that you went back to that, because I want to clarify something when you were saying earlier about Al-Qaeda being good Muslims for outside of the power of the state resorting to fighting an enemy that is attacking from without. Obviously, you're an American and you're on America's side in this, but you're just, dispassionate analysis, as you say. But you call them good Muslims in that sense, and I wonder whether, and honestly, I don't know enough about the what all the Quran says or what modern Sunni imams' consensus is on these questions exactly, but I assume that they don't countenance targeting innocent civilians in order to score political points.
Well, no, they probably don't, but they understand what war is about, Scott. The idea that civilians, innocent people, don't get killed in wars is something, kind of a new age thought. Has nothing to do with reality. It has nothing to do with war. It has nothing to do with history.
Well, it's the difference between targeting them or not, right? Kinda. I mean, that's certainly what the U.S. government says when it kills people, is that, we were shooting at this guy, and those guys shouldn't have been nearby. But
war
that's
is never
different
going to
than
be a science, John.
Yeah.
Who firebombed Tokyo?
Oh yeah, Truman.
The only mercy in war is a speedy conclusion. The first thing is don't go to war unless it's a direct life and death interest. But if you have to go to war, then kill everybody you need to kill and get out of it. It's a mercy to them and it's a mercy to us.
Well, but
all the rest of the crap about just war, they ought to get all those just war philosophers, professors, teachers, pundits, and turn them over to the Khmer Rouge for about 2 months of re-education.
Actually, the Republicans do have connections right to the Khmer Rouge. That could be arranged.
I just picked a group out of my hat, that's all.
No, it's a good one. Yeah, and one with, friends in the Reagan administration. No, listen, though, but here's the thing, though, about that is, and like you say, and you've reiterated a few times, never mind the Shia for the sake of argument here. They're the minority and the outgroup among, and certainly not the enemy that we're addressing here anyway. But the reaction of Muslims from Morocco to the Philippines was they were horrified about September 11th. And they didn't think Osama was a hero and represented them. And they sure as hell didn't endorse his tactics of targeting and slaughtering civilians in our towers. And
well, I would say about that, Scott, how do you know?
Well, I read the Gallup poll did one hell of a great survey where they said they love America, they just hate our foreign policy, and they certainly don't support terrorism as defined as targeting civilians in order to create this kind of reaction, that kind of thing. And they studied, they didn't do phone calls, and they went on the ground from Morocco to the Philippines and all through Indonesia and everywhere else and talked to Muslims all over the world and found that, more like the other part of what you say, that they just hate our foreign policy. Otherwise, we could be getting along just fine here. It's not so much a religious mandate as it's the same mandate that the Wolverines took in Red Dawn or any nationalist would take in fighting for his own home county in any war.
Well, what I would say is the intervention puts Islam into play, puts religion into play. I also have always suspected the Poles, perhaps not as much as Indonesia and Malaysia, but the polls taken among Muslims in places like Egypt and Morocco and other places where the society is basically completely infiltrated by security officers and their agents. People don't want to be saying things that might bring them into jail. Like, we thought Osama's attack on New York City was a great thing. Very few people are going to say that and risk having Mubarak's security service come down on their heads at that point.
Sure.
But I would say the other thing about in comparison to those polls, Scott, is look at the growth in the movement. Geographically, manpower. The other thing I would say is the one thing that almost wrecked Al-Qaeda in 2006 was Zarqawi cutting the heads off of people and televising it. There was an enormous revulsion in the Muslim world, and not just from the clerics that worked for King Abdullah or who worked for Mubarak, but from common people. Right now, today, that's entirely missing.
Yeah,
the clerics that work for...
It's gone on too long now, in other words.
I think the movement has done two things. First, it has spread Three things. Second, the Muslim world is more and more motivated by our intervention in it. And third, they've been successful. They defeated when Osama talked about the Arabs following the strong horse, they just beat us in Iraq. They're beating us in Afghanistan, which I think at the end of the day is probably a more serious problem than Iraq is in terms of immediate. And if we go back into Iraq with any kind of ground troops, they'll beat us again there. These guys got rifles from the Korean War. How are they beating a superpower 3 times in 15 years?
Stupidity on this side, or at least
absolutely, sir. Absolutely.
And see, it's not just stupidity because it's willful stupidity. I mean, the idea after September 11th, I don't know if I could prove this, but I certainly believe was go ahead and let Osama go because we need that Goldstein because there hardly was an Al-Qaeda at all. It was a few hundred guys. That was why, if you want to be real cynical about it, well, I don't know. It's a hindsight thing. But the real Al-Qaeda movement, the new generation of Al-Qaeda everything after September 11th came with the invasion and the destruction of the Iraqi government in 2003.
Well, that's exactly correct. That's exactly correct, Scott. What it did was probably something that Osama could never have done by himself, and that's make the jihad self-motivating. It has not been affected negatively in the least by bin Laden being killed, perhaps emotionally among some people who miss him. But the movement itself is growing. Al-Qaeda is part of it, but it's no longer the vanguard. It is part of the movement. It's an important part of the movement, but it is not what it was in 2005 and 6.
Yep. All right, I'm sorry that we got to stop this conversation. We could keep talking for a long, long time, but I know you got to go, and I sure as hell am late. So thank you very much for your time, Mike. I appreciate it.
Pleasure, Scott. Look forward to talking to you again.
Okay,
bye-bye.
Good times. All right, everybody, that is Michael Scheuer. He wrote the book, Osama bin Laden. We'll be right back. Phone records, financial and location data, Prism, Tempora, X-Keyscore, Boundless Informant. Hey, y'all, Scott Horton here for offnow.org. Now, here's the deal. Due to the Snowden revelations, we have a great opportunity for a short period of time to get some real rollback of the national surveillance state. Now, they're already trying to tire us by introducing fake reforms in the Congress. And the courts, they betrayed their sworn oaths to the Constitution and Bill of Rights again and again, and can in no way be trusted to stop the abuses for us. We've got to do it ourselves. How? We nullify it at the state level. It's still not easy, but the Off Now project of the 10th Amendment Center has gotten off to a great start. I mean it. There's real reason to be optimistic here. They've gotten their model legislation introduced all over the place, in state after state. I've lost count, more than a dozen. You're always wondering, yeah, but what can we do? Here's something important, something that can work if we do the work. Get started cutting off the NSA support in your state. Go to offnow.org. Hey, all, Scott Horton here. It's always safe to say that one should keep at least some of your savings in precious metals as a hedge against inflation. And if this economy ever does heat back up and the banks start expanding credit, rising prices could make metals a very profitable bet. Since 1977, Robertson Roberts Brokerage Inc. has been helping people buy and sell gold, silver, platinum, and palladium, and they do it well. They're fast, reliable, and trusted for more than 35 years. And they take Bitcoin. Call Robertson Roberts at 1-800-874-9760 or stop by rrbi.co.